From now on, we'll take care of the house ourselves, so go live somewhere else." My brother and his wife said this with a composure that struck me to the core. They sat opposite, looking so confident in themselves, as if they had just made a decision that would change the fate of everyone around them. "Mom agrees with us," my brother added with a slight grin. His voice was too calm for such betrayal. It took me a moment to realize the weight of those words. A vortex of thoughts swirled inside me. Do they really realize who was actually paying the bills and keeping the house afloat? My brother and his wife have always lived quite carefree, never worrying about the financial side of life. And now, when the house, our native home, which has always been a fortress and shelter for us, was supposed to become something like their property, I suddenly found myself an unnecessary obstacle. Didn't I do my part to keep this house going? Wasn't my support as significant as their efforts? I never would have thought that they, those whom I considered close, would show me such disrespect. But maybe it's my own fault for letting this happen. Somewhere deep inside, I made a decision, no longer to stay on the sidelines, no longer to be a silent participant in my own life. My name is Katie, I'm 30 years old. At the moment, I live in my parents' house, a house that has become a refuge for me after life outside this fortress turned into a series of trials for me. After graduating from college, I enthusiastically tried to find my place in the world by joining the ranks of employees of a large company, hoping to succeed in a competitive environment. But the reality turned out to be much more complicated than I could have imagined. Working in the office, constant stressful tasks and high expectations of my superiors quickly exhausted my strength. And so, discouraged and exhausted, I returned to the house, which has always been a place of warmth and support. While receiving unemployment benefits, I was looking for new opportunities to get back on my feet. It was then that I learned about the possibilities of working from home, and it became a salvation for me. My specialty at the university was related to science, and I was able to apply my knowledge by becoming a freelance engineer. I started with small projects, and the income was modest. But with each new task, I learned, gained experience and found confidence in my abilities. This job was completely different compared to what I experienced in a corporate environment. In it, I found an opportunity to develop at my own pace, without pressure from outside. Gradually, my income began to grow. A year later, I was earning the same amount as an ordinary employee of a large company. But despite this, my parents, especially my mother, could not fully understand that I was actually working. My father, after much explanation, finally realized the essence of my activity. But my mother, who always held more traditional views, found it difficult to accept this new reality. No matter how much I tried to explain that my work at home is no less serious than work in the office, she kept coming back to the same questions over and over again. How long do you plan to stay at home, or you need to find yourself outside these walls more? It seemed to me that for her my work on the internet was just a temporary hobby that did not deserve attention. My mother was often suspicious of me. It seemed that no matter how hard I tried to explain to her the nature of my work, she always remained on guard, as if she expected me to reveal some dark secret to her. How could I make her understand? Neither words nor deeds could convince her that my work was real and honest. I showed her emails from clients, sent her reports on my salary, explained that each project brings me a stable income, but it was all in vain. She didn't accept my lifestyle, as if she refused to see the obvious. One evening, while talking over dinner, my mother suddenly said in the same cold, slightly wary tone, "You're in some kind of shady business or religion, right? After all, this can't be a real job." I froze, trying to contain my irritation. It wasn't the first time she had made such remarks, but each time they cut deeper. "No, Mom, that's not true," I replied quietly but confidently. "I receive regular payments. It's a reliable job, and it allows me to live without constant stress." But she just shrugged, as if my words didn't matter. "You say that, but there's always the possibility that it's all unemployment benefits. And you won't be able to get it forever." My mother's worries seemed endless. She couldn't calm down, even seeing the real evidence of my employment. Her fears left their mark on our relationship, making me feel constantly on the defensive. At that time, I was increasingly thinking about living on my own. But at that time, I had not yet accumulated enough funds to leave. It seemed like a difficult and risky step to leave the house that had always been a pillar of support for me and start a new life alone. Around this time, my father's condition began to deteriorate. His legs and back did not allow him to lead the same lifestyle. He stayed in the chair more and more often, struggling to get to his feet, and he needed care. My father retired early, but the sudden loss of income and deteriorating health took a heavy toll on him. One day, watching him try to get up from his chair, I asked, "Dad, are you okay?" He looked at me with a tired smile. "Oh, Katie, I'm sorry to bother you. But don't worry, I have a pension, and I'll manage somehow." I thought about his words. Dad was always proud and never asked for help, even when he needed it. But his health deteriorated, and with it the costs of his treatment and care increased. And although he tried to sound confident, I knew that our family was on the verge of a financial crisis right now. "I've been thinking about it," he said, scratching his chin. "But considering how much Mom spends, I'm not sure I can handle it." There was a weariness on his father's face that was hard to hide. He has been worried about the future of our family for a long time. No matter how much he tried to convince himself that everything would be fine, I could see how financial problems weighed on him. His concern was transmitted to me, because I knew that once it was he who supported me throughout my life. I went to college thanks to his financial support. He was the pillar that allowed me to follow my dreams, even when I returned home to recover from mental health problems. Should I leave him now? Perhaps it's not the best idea to leave your father and start living on your own when he needs help. My mother was also confused by the sudden deterioration of his condition. She had always relied on her father, and now that he could no longer be so active, her fears increased. But I knew I had to do something to change the situation. "Don't worry, Dad," I said with confidence, although deep down I still didn't fully believe my words. "From now on, I will support our family." My father looked at me in surprise. "Oh, really?" His voice sounded dubious. "But I can't imagine that you have such a large income." I understood his doubts. He was a realist, and his life experience did not allow him to believe in easy ways. But I decided to prove to him that he can rely on me. "Don't worry, Dad," I repeated, showing him my bank account information. "My current income is stable, and it has been increasing lately. I will be able to support us." "Thank you, Katie," my father said, his voice low but grateful. This prompted me to take on most of the costs of maintaining the house. Every month, I transferred a certain amount to his bank account to help with day-to-day expenses, medical bills, and other expenses. I knew it was necessary. My mother, without hesitation, had been using her father's credit card for a long time, not always controlling her spending. So I created a new main card in my name and gave my mother an additional one to better manage my budget. My father saved up small savings as much as he could and suggested that my mother follow his example. But the mother, who was always inclined to impulsive decisions, suddenly said, "Then we should kick Katie out of the house." This phrase, which sounded so casual, as if she was discussing the need to replace old curtains, struck me. But my father immediately stood up for me. "Katie is making a financial contribution. It will be much more difficult for us without her help." I saw his eyes light up for a moment with anger, which he usually did not show. That, at least, made the mother think. She was still skeptical, suspecting that I was trying to use them despite all my financial support. But in the end, her father convinced her, and she agreed to let me stay in the house. However, her attitude towards me has not changed. I continued to work, helping around the house, but my mother took it for granted, as a matter of course. My every action was accompanied by her stern, harsh remarks. Could you finish your business faster? I tried to be patient, but at one point I couldn't stand it. Sorry, it's not easy, because I'm working too. But her response was even more harsh. You say that all the time, but is it really that difficult? Mom didn't listen to me, she just didn't understand. Over time, I realized that our relationship had become almost irreparable. She never took my work seriously, didn't see anything worthwhile in it. But the most painful thing was that she didn't appreciate my attempts to support the family either. Only my father understood what I was really doing, and it was a real support for me. We continued to live like this for another year, in constant friction and tension. But one day, as if time had suddenly decided to catch up with him, his father aged dramatically. His health deteriorated to such an extent that he ended up in the hospital, where he needed daily treatment. I came to visit him in his room. "Hi, Dad, how are you today?" I asked, trying to hide my anxiety. "Oh, Katie, thank you for coming." His voice sounded weaker than usual, and there was fatigue in it. "It doesn't look like things are going to get better anytime soon, but I hope it's a little less of a burden for you." His words pierced me. I wanted to say that taking care of him has never been a burden to me, but his next remark stopped me. "I know that you and Mom don't get along very well." These words reminded me of the many misunderstandings and conflicts that only intensified with his hospitalization. It was getting harder to breathe in the house. The mother, as if even more withdrawn into her old fears and habits, could not hide her irritation. And I, feeling more and more pressure every day, did not know how to find a way out of this situation. Nevertheless, I continued to support my parents. Despite all the disagreements with my mother, I felt responsible for her and my father. After all, it was our family. Sometimes I could remember how my mother took care of me when I was a child. Every day she cooked me dinners, and in the evenings, despite her fatigue, she always tried to cook dinner, which the whole family gathered for. These memories warmed my heart and gave me the strength to endure. But then something happened that completely changed my perception of the situation. One evening I heard my mother say to my brother Dylan, "I've been waiting for you. You're too late." I froze at the door, not understanding what was going on. "I'm sorry, Mom, I was a little busy," Dylan replied. His wife Mary came in with him. "Hello, mother-in-law," she said dryly. Her mother answered her with a warmth I hadn't heard in her voice for a long time. "Thank you for coming." I stood on the sidelines, too surprised to say anything. When Dylan and Mary came up to me, their gazes were as cold as an icy wind. Suddenly my brother said that it had been decided a long time ago and without my participation. "From now on, we will live here too." My heart skipped a beat. "Why?" I managed to say. "Mom was worried that it might be hard for you to be alone while Dad wasn't around." I turned to my mother, hoping to see at least a shadow of an explanation in her eyes. But she turned away, avoiding my gaze. "I hope you're ready to work a little, otherwise it will be difficult for you to stay in this house." His brother's voice sounded like a cold warning, like an ultimatum. These words were a repetition of the same topic that has been discussed more than once, but now it has acquired a new connotation. The fact that my brother and his wife suddenly moved in with us turned out to be not just family support during a difficult period, but, it seems, the beginning of difficult changes. My brother, Dylan, graduated from college with honors and got a job at a reputable company. I never doubted that his salary was enough to live separately, to provide for himself and his wife. But now it seemed to me that their move was not as accidental as it might seem at first glance. Haven't they always looked at me with a slight arrogance, considering my lifestyle to be something temporary and unimportant? The new life in the house shared with my brother and his wife Mary turned out to be much more difficult than I could have imagined. I have always been used to the fact that there was a certain freedom in the house. Each of us started our morning in our own way, and breakfast was never a formal part of the day. But now everything has changed. "Katie, have you been up yet?" Wake up and make breakfast." Mary knocked on my door, not hiding the irritation in her voice. But I was already on my feet. My work started early, and the morning was the most productive time of the day for me. I focused on my projects, immersing myself in work when the silence and freshness of the morning helped me achieve the best results. But despite this, I had to interrupt my business and go to the kitchen. "Oh, I need to make breakfast," I repeated to myself, feeling the fatigue of these constant demands growing inside. I made a simple breakfast: soft fried eggs, fresh salad, buttered toast, and sausage. I always thought that such a set was perfect for the morning table, but it seems that my sister-in-law had a different opinion. "What is this? Did you make breakfast?" Her voice sounded so disappointed that I felt embarrassed for myself. "Not enough," my brother said quietly, looking around the table with obvious displeasure. I could feel the anger burning inside me, which I could barely contain. "Then you don't need to eat it," I replied, trying not to show how much their tone hurt me. Their faces fell in surprise, and for a moment there was silence in the room. But it quickly turned to condemnation. "What kind of attitude is this? Who do you think you are? This kind of behavior is unacceptable. You need to help around the house." I stood there, barely able to contain my irritation. "I have a job too," I said, trying to be calm. "Oh, a job? Really? I can't believe it," my brother replied mockingly. "Dylan always looked down on me, perhaps inheriting this attitude from our mother." Now his wife looked at me the same way he did, with a slight contempt that made the situation unbearable. That day finally showed me that living under the same roof with them has become almost impossible. They demanded complete submission from me, as if my work, my contribution to the house meant nothing. It took up too much of my energy and time, which I could have devoted to something more important. Without saying a word, I went to my room, packed my laptop, and left the house without turning around. When I entered my father's hospital room, he met me with a surprised look. "Katie, what happened? You look worried." I took a deep breath and told him about what happened at home. My father was silent, listening to me attentively, and then he said, "I didn't know they were like that." "I'm sorry, Katie. Don't worry about it, okay? You can choose your own path. You don't have to stay where you feel bad." These words sounded so sincere and warm that it made me feel better. "I'm sure Mom feels safer when Dylan is around, and you shouldn't stay in a house where you're not respected. All I want is for you to be happy, so live your life the way you want to." These words from my father became the support I needed the most. I made the decision to leave home, where I was considered a burden. When I returned home in the evening, a scene was waiting for me, as if from a drama film. The faces of the mother, brother, and daughter-in-law were serious. "Where have you been?" my brother asked coldly. "Because of you, I had to take the day off." "How could you do that?" I was amazed by his words. How easy it was for him to take a vacation for such a seemingly insignificant reason. His brother's voice, although usually confident, sounded confused this time, as if for the first time he realized the gravity of the situation. "Did you really manage all the money in our family home?" he asked, not hiding his surprise and, perhaps, even some fear. There was a note of helplessness in his voice that I hadn't heard before. "Oh yes, it's true," I replied calmly. There was no hint of anger or resentment in my voice, just a simple confirmation of the facts. The brother was silent for a moment and then, obviously gathering his thoughts, asked, "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" I almost smiled at his naivety. "Well, I mentioned several times that I have a job, that I handle our financial affairs, but neither you nor Mom believed me. Do you remember?" There was a deep sigh from the other side of the wire. Apparently, my brother recalled those moments when he and his mother dismissively brushed off my words, when they laughed at my occupation and what I did for the family. Now his self-confidence has cracked, and he has begun to realize the consequences of his actions. It's all Mom. She said a lot of things, and I got confused. I thought you were just, you know. Yes, I understand, I replied shortly, without giving him any excuses. He always followed his mother, no matter how educated and successful he was. But now the situation has changed, and my brother, for the first time in his life, faced reality when he had to solve the financial issues of the family on his own. We have money problems, Katie. My brother's voice darkened noticeably, and I realized that he was the real source of his concern. Mom spends too much, and now we can't pay for utilities, and also all these branded purchases. We don't know what to do. This news did not come as a surprise to me. My mother always had a weakness for luxury, not realizing that the financial well-being of the family was based on a thin thread of my work. Now that I had withdrawn the money to separate accounts and left the house, they began to realize how much depended on me. I sighed softly and continued, "Yes, I know that. I have done my best to support you in many ways. But you didn't see it or didn't want to see it. Katie, listen," my brother took on a different tone, almost pleading. "We can't do this without your help. Mom keeps shopping like she used to, and we thought we could do it on our own, but it didn't work out." There was a hidden request in his words, the one I was waiting for. He couldn't admit his mistake outright, couldn't apologize the way he should, but he knew that I was probably the only person capable of saving them. At that moment, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, I wanted to help, because this is still my family. But on the other hand, I remembered how they humiliated and rejected me. That scene, when I left the house under their grins, was still in front of my eyes, and the memory of the pain they caused me prevented me from simply agreeing to their terms. "Katie, please," my brother's voice interrupted my thoughts, desperate but still proud. I had to decide something about that. "I'll think about it," I finally replied, giving him time to realize the depth of his dependence on me before I hung up. After I hung up the phone, the silence in my apartment enveloped me again like a cozy blanket, protecting me from the chaos and worries that remained outside the threshold. His brother's last words were still ringing in his head, panicked, confused, riddled with a plea for help. When he mentioned that he had been fired, that he had made a big mistake, I felt something like regret, but not so strong as to involve myself in their problems again. All this time, they lived in the illusion that the family was always provided for, as if money appeared in the accounts as if by magic. They were so used to this stability that they never thought about what was behind it. My brother, my mother, even his wife, they all took it for granted while I surreptitiously solved their financial problems. And now, when everything got out of control, when I refused to support them, reality overtook them like a cold shower. "You work for a big company," I told him then, assuming he was still well off. But his admission that he was fired took me by surprise. "I made a mistake," he said, "but this mistake was not an isolated one. It started much earlier, when he, like everyone else, rejected my efforts, my worries, believing that I was just a shadow, an inconspicuous figure in the house that did not deserve attention. Now, when their well-being collapsed, they came to me again with an outstretched hand, asking me to transfer money to their accounts, as it was before. But I couldn't and didn't want to be their lifeline anymore. They put themselves in this situation. My brother, who was fired from the company, hoping for his father's savings, for his pension, now realized that no one would pay for him. His wife left, unable to withstand the pressure. His mother was on the verge of bankruptcy. Her debts were growing every day, and all this led to the fact that they were on the verge. But it was their life, their choices, and I couldn't, and didn't want to, interfere. My father, a wise and calm man, also couldn't stand all this drama and consulted with a lawyer about the divorce. He left our family home, changed hospitals, and now lived separately, away from his mother, who, as he said, had long ceased to understand him. I visited him every day. Every time I saw him, I felt how he became more relaxed, getting rid of the burden of the past years, which did not allow him to breathe. His smile is what I kept working for, building my life anew. She was sincere, light, like a person who has finally found peace. Meanwhile, my brother moved into a small apartment. One of my friends told me about his life, modest, economical, the kind he was never ready for. He found it difficult to come to terms with the new reality, especially the fact that he had to listen to the instructions of younger employees in his part-time job. As a college graduate, a man who considered himself superior to others, it was now hard for him to accept that life had taught him a lesson and that he was no longer at the top. My mother, who was used to living in a big way, still did not realize the seriousness of the situation. Her debts were growing, her habits were not changing, and although I was worried about her, deep down I knew I couldn't help her anymore. She herself must learn to live within her means, or she will drown under the weight of her own decisions. Now I've been working hard, but with pleasure. My new home, where peace and order reigned, became a refuge for me. Here I could focus on my projects, develop, earn more, and even think about trying something new. It was a time of renewal, a time for myself. I was building my life from scratch, and finally I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Every day I visited my father, spent time with him, listened to his stories and laughed with him. His cheerful smile reminded me that everything we do in life should bring us joy.